Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy. Book 1, Chapter 45. Nekhludoff meant to rearrange the whole of his external life, to let his large house and move to an hotel. But Agrafena Petrovna pointed out that it was useless to change anything before the winter. No one would rent a townhouse for the summer. Anyhow, he would have to live and keep his things somewhere. And so all his efforts to change his manner of life, he meant to live more simply, as the students live, led to nothing. Not only did everything remain as it was, but the house was suddenly filled with new activity. All that was made of wool or fur was taken out to be aired and beaten. The gatekeeper, the boy, the cook, and Corney himself took part in this activity. All sorts of strange furs, which no one ever used, and various uniforms were taken out and hung on a line. Then the carpets and furniture were brought out, and the gatekeeper and the boy rolled their sleeves up their muscular arms and stood beating these things, keeping strict time, while the rooms were filled with the smell of naphthalene. When Nekhludoff crossed the yard or looked out of the window and saw all this going on, he was surprised at the great number of things there were, all quite useless. Their only use, Nekhludoff thought, was the providing of exercise for Agrafena Petrovna Corney, the gatekeeper, the boy, and the cook. But it's not worthwhile altering my manner of life now, he thought, while Maslova's case is not decided. Besides, it is too difficult. It will alter of itself when she will be set free or exiled, and I follow her. On the appointed day Nekhludoff drove up to the advocate Fanarin's own splendid house, which was decorated with huge palms and other plants and wonderful curtains, in fact, with all the expensive luxury witnessing to the possession of much idle money, that is, money acquired without labour, which only those possess who grow rich suddenly. In the waiting-room, just as in a doctor's waiting-room, he found many dejected-looking people sitting around several tables, on which lay illustrated papers meant to amuse them, awaiting their turns to be admitted to the advocate. The advocate's assistant sat in the room at a high desk, and having recognized Nekhludoff, he came up to him and said he would go and announce him at once. But the assistant had not reached the door before it opened, and the sounds of loud, animated voices were heard. The voice of a middle-aged, sturdy merchant, with a red face and thick moustaches, and the voice of Fanarin himself. Fanarin was also a middle-aged man of medium height, with a worn look on his face. Both faces bore the expression which you see on the faces of those who have just concluded a profitable but not quite honest transaction. "Your own fault, you know, my dear sir," Fanarin said, smiling. "We'd all be in heaven were it not for our sins." "Oh, yes, yes, we all know that," and both laughed unnaturally. "Oh, Prince Nekhludoff, please to step in," said Fanarin, seeing him, and, nodding once more to the merchant, he led Nekhludoff into his business cabinet, furnished in a severely correct style. "Won't you smoke?" said the advocate, sitting down opposite Nekhludoff and trying to conceal a smile, apparently still excited by the success of the accomplished transaction. "Thanks, I have come about Maslova's case." Yes, yes, directly. But oh, what rogues these fat money-bags are," he said. "You saw this here fellow? Why, he has about 12 million roubles, and he cannot speak correctly. And if he can get a 25-rouble note out of you, he'll have it, if he's to wrench it out with his teeth. He says 'Evan' and 'hour,' and you say 'this here fellow'?" Nekhludoff thought, with an unsurmountable feeling of aversion towards this man who wished to show by his free and easy manner that he and Nekhludoff belonged to one and the same camp, while his other clients belonged to another. "He has worried me to death, a fearful scoundrel. I felt I must relieve my feelings," said the advocate, as if to excuse speaking about things that had no reference to business. "Well, how about your case?" "I have read it attentively, but do not approve of it. I mean that greenhorn of an advocate has left no valid reason for an appeal." Well then, what have you decided? One moment. Tell him, he said to his assistant, who had just come in, that I keep to what I have said. If he can, it's all right. If not, no matter. But he won't agree. Well, no matter. And the advocate frowned. There now, and it's said that we advocates get our money for nothing, he remarked, after a pause. I have freed one insolvent debtor from a totally false charge, and now they all flock to me. Yet every such case costs enormous labour. Why don't we, too, lose bits of flesh in the inkstand, as some writer or other has said? Well, as to your case, or, rather, the case you are taking an interest in, it has been conducted abominably. There is no good reason for appealing. Still, he continued, we can but try to get the sentence revoked. This is what I have noted down. He took up several sheets of paper covered with writing and began to read rapidly, slurring over the uninteresting legal terms and laying particular stress on some sentences. To the Court of Appeal, Criminal Department, etc., etc., according to the decisions, etc., the verdict, etc., so-and-so, Maslova, pronounced guilty of having caused the death through poison of the merchant Smelkoff, and has, according to the statute 1454 of the Penal Code, been sentenced to Siberia, etc., etc. He stopped. Evidently, in spite of his being so used to it, he still felt pleasure in listening to his own productions. This sentence is the direct result of the most glaring judicial perversion and error, he continued impressively, and there are grounds for its revocation. Firstly, the reading of the medical report of the examination of Smelkoff's intestines was interrupted by the President at the very beginning. This is point 1. But it was the prosecuting side that demanded this reading, Nekhludoff said with surprise. That does not matter. There might have been reasons for the defence to demand this reading too. Oh, but there could have been no reason whatever for that. It is a ground for appeal, though. To continue. Secondly, he went on reading, when Maslova's advocate, in his speech for the defence, wishing to characterise Maslova's personality, referred to the causes of her fall, he was interrupted by the President calling him to order for the alleged deviation from the direct subject. Yet, as has been repeatedly pointed out by the Senate, the elucidation of the criminal's characteristics and his or her moral standpoint in general has a significance of the first importance in criminal cases, even if only as a guide in the settling of the question of imputation. That's point 2, he said, with a look at Nekhludoff. But he spoke so badly that no one could make anything of it, Nekhludoff said, still more astonished. The fellow's quite a fool, and of course could not be expected to say anything sensible, Fanarin said, laughing, but all the same it will do as a reason for appeal. Thirdly, the President, in his summing up, contrary to the direct decree of Section 1, Statute 801 of the Criminal Code, omitted to inform the jury what the judicial points are that constitute guilt, and did not mention that having admitted to the fact of Maslova having administered the poison to Smelkoff, the jury had a right not to impute the guilt of murder to her, since the proofs of wilful intent to deprive Smelkoff of life were absent, and only to pronounce her guilty of carelessness resulting in the death of the merchant, which she did not desire. This is the chief point. Yes, but we ought to have known that ourselves. It was our mistake. And now the fourth point, the advocate continued. The form of the answer given by the jury contained an evident contradiction. Maslova is accused of wilfully poisoning Smelkoff, her one object being that of cupidity, the only motive to commit murder she could have had. The jury in their verdict acquit her of the intent to rob, or participation in the stealing of valuables, from which it follows that they intended also to acquit her of the intent to murder, and only through a misunderstanding, which arose from the incompleteness of the President's summing up, omitted to express it in due form in their answer. Therefore an answer of this kind by the jury absolutely demanded the application of statutes 816 and 808 of the Criminal Code of Procedure, that is, an explanation by the President to the jury of the mistake made by them, and another debate on the question of the prisoner's guilt. Then why did the President not do it? I too should like to know why, Fanarin said, laughing. Then the Senate will, of course, correct this error? That will all depend on who will preside there at the time. Well now, there it is. I have further said, he continued rapidly, a verdict of this kind gave the court no right to condemn Basilova to be punished as a criminal, and to apply Section 3, Statute 771 of the Penal Code to her case. This is a decided and gross violation of the basic principles of our criminal law. In view of the reasons stated, I have the honour of appealing to you, etc., etc., the refutation according to 909, 910 and Section 2, 912 and 928, Statute of the Criminal Code, etc., etc., to carry this case before another department of the same court for a further examination. There. All that can be done is done. But to be frank, I have little hope of success, though, of course, it all depends on what members will be present at the Senate. If you have any influence there, you can but try. I do know some. All right. Only be quick about it, else they'll all go off for a change of air. Then you may have to wait 3 months before they return. Then, in case of failure, we still have the possibility of appealing to His Majesty. This, too, depends on the private influence you can bring to work. In this case, too, I am at your service. I mean as to the working of the petition, not the influence. Thank you. Now as to your fees? My assistant will hand you the petition and tell you. One thing more. The procurer gave me a pass for visiting this person in prison, but they tell me I must also get a permission from the governor in order to get an interview at another time and in another place than those appointed. Is this necessary? Yes, I think so, but the governor is away at present. A vice-governor is in his place, and he is such an impenetrable fool that you'll scarcely be able to do anything with him. Is it Meslenikov? Yes. I know him, said Nekhludoff, and got up to go. At this moment a horribly ugly little bony, snub-nosed, yellow-faced woman flew into the room. It was the advocate's wife, who did not seem to be in the least bit troubled by her ugliness. She was attired in the most original manner. She seemed enveloped in something made of velvet and silk, something yellow and green, and her thin hair was crimped. She stepped out triumphantly into the ante-room, followed by a tall smiling man with a greenish complexion, dressed in a coat with silk facings and a white tie. This was an author. Nekhludoff knew him by sight. She opened the cabinet door and said, "Anatoly, you must come to me. Here is Simon Ivanovitch, who will read his poems, and you must absolutely come and read about Garshin." Nekhludoff noticed that she whispered something to her husband, and, thinking it was something concerning him, wished to go away. But she caught him up and said, "I beg your pardon, Prince, I know you, and thinking an introduction superfluous, I beg you to stay and take part in our literary matinee. It will be most interesting. M. Fanarin will read." "You see what a lot I have to do," said Fanarin, spreading out his hands and smiling, pointing to his wife, as if to show how impossible it was to resist so charming a creature. Nekhludoff thanked the advocate's wife with extreme politeness for the honour she did him in inviting him, but refused the invitation with a sad and solemn look, and left the room. "What an affected fellow," said the advocate's wife when he had gone out. In the ante-room the assistant handed him a ready-written petition, and said that the fees, including the business with the Senate and the Commission, would come to 1,000 roubles, and explained that M. Fanarin did not usually undertake this kind of business, but did it only to oblige Nekhludoff. "And about this petition, who is to sign it?" "The prisoner may do it herself, or if this is inconvenient, M. Fanarin can, if he gets a power of attorney from her." "Oh, no, I shall take the petition to her and get her to sign it," said Nekhludoff. glad of the opportunity of seeing her before the appointed day. End of Book 1, Chapter 45 of Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Louise Maud. Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy. Book 1, Chapter 46. At the usual time the jailer's whistle sounded in the corridors of the prison. The iron doors of the cells rattled, bare feet pattered, heels clattered, and the prisoners who acted as scavengers passed along the corridors, filling the air with disgusting smells. The prisoners washed, dressed, and came out for revision, then went to get boiling water for their tea. The conversation at breakfast in all the cells was very lively. It was all about two prisoners who were to be flogged that day. One, Vassiliev, was a young man of some education, a clerk, who had killed his mistress in a fit of jealousy. His fellow prisoners liked him because he was merry and generous and firm in his behaviour with the prison authorities. He knew the laws and insisted on their being carried out. Therefore he was disliked by the authorities. 3 weeks before, a jailer struck one of the scavengers who had spilt some soup over his new uniform. Vassiliev took the part of the scavenger, saying it was not lawful to strike a prisoner. "I'll teach you the law," said the jailer, and gave Vassiliev a scolding. Vassiliev replied in like manner, and the jailer was going to hit him, but Vassiliev seized the jailer's hands, held them fast for about 3 minutes, and, after giving the hands a twist, pushed the jailer out of the door. The jailer complained to the inspector, who ordered Vassiliev to be put into a solitary cell. The solitary cells were a row of dark closets, locked from outside, and there were neither beds, nor chairs, nor tables in them, so that the inmates had to sit or lie on the dirty floor while the rats, of which there were a great many in those cells, ran across them. The rats were so bold that they stole the bread from the prisoners, and even attacked them if they stopped moving. Vassiliev said he would not go into the solitary cell because he had not done anything wrong, but they used force. Then he began struggling, and 2 other prisoners helped him to free himself from the jailers. All the jailers assembled, and among them was Petrov, who was distinguished for his strength. The prisoners got thrown down and pushed into the solitary cells. The governor was immediately informed that something very like a rebellion had taken place, and he sent back an order to flog the 2 chief offenders, Vassiliev and the tramp, Nepomniachtchi, giving each 30 strokes with a birch rod. The flogging was appointed to take place in the women's interviewing room. All this was known in the prison since the evening, and it was being talked about with animation in all the cells. Korobleva, Khoroshevka, Theodosia, and Maslova sat together in their corner, drinking tea, all of them flushed and animated by the vodka they had drunk, for Maslova, who now had a constant supply of vodka, freely treated her companions to it. "He's not been a-writing or anything," Korobleva said, referring to Vassiliev, as she bit tiny pieces of a lump of sugar with her strong teeth. "He only stuck up for a chum, because it's not lawful to strike prisoners nowadays." "And he's a fine fellow, I've heard say," said Theodosia, who sat bareheaded, with her long plaits round her head, on a log of wood opposite the shelf bedstead on which the teapot stood. "There now, if you were to ask him," the watchman's wife said to Maslova, by him she meant Nekhludoff. "I shall tell him, he'll do anything for me," Maslova said, tossing her head and smiling. "Yes, but when is he coming?" "And they've already gone to fetch them," said Theodosia. "It is terrible," she added, with a sigh. "I once did see how they flogged a peasant in the village. Father-in-law, he sent me once to the village elder. Well, I went, and there—" The watchman's wife began her long story, which was interrupted by the sound of voices and steps in the corridor above them. The women were silent, and sat listening. "There they are, hauling him along, the devils," Khoroshavka said. "They'll do him to death, they will. The jailers are so enraged with him because he never would give in to them." All was quiet again upstairs, and the watchman's wife finished her story of how she was that frightened when she went into the barn and saw them flogging a peasant. Her insides turned at the sight, and so on. Khoroshavka related how Sheglov had been flogged and never uttered a sound. Then Theodosia put away the tea things, and Korobleva and the watchman's wife took up their sewing. Maslova sat on the bedstead with her arms around her knees, dull and depressed. She was about to lie down and try to sleep when the woman warder called her into the office to see a visitor. "Now mind, and don't forget to tell him about us," the old woman, Menshova, said, while Maslova was arranging the kerchief on her head before the dim looking glass. "We did not set fire to the house, but he himself, the fiend, did it. His workmen saw him do it, and will not damn his soul by denying it. You just tell to ask to see my Mitri. Mitri will tell him all about it, as plain as can be. Just think of our being locked up in prison when we never dreamt of any ill, while he, the fiend, is enjoying himself at the pub with another man's wife." "That's not the law," remarked Korobleva. I'll tell him, answered Maslova. "Suppose I have another drop, just to keep up courage," she added with a wink, and Korobleva poured out half a cup of vodka, which Maslova drank. Then, having wiped her mouth and repeating the words "just to keep up courage," tossing her head and smiling gaily, she followed the warder along the corridor. End of Book 1, Chapter 46 of Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy.